I'm your host, Madeline.
I am your co-host, David.
And this is Pick Me Up, I'm Scared, the podcast.
Here we are.
Here we are. So today, David, we're talking about a subject
dear to your heart.
Many people have requested. I'm kind of surprised we never did it.
I'm actually kind of glad we're doing it.
Are you?
I don't want to because I just, generally speaking, find war to be kind of boring. However, we can do this.
Yes.
And then never talk about it.
We're never talking about it again after this. That's it.
Yeah.
What is it?
The Korean War.
The Korean War. We're talking about the Korean War. We just recorded a lovely bonus episode for our Patreon listeners.
And today, so that episode is sort of an extraordinarily brief overview.
It's around 30 minutes. So if you are a Patreon subscriber, go listen to that first, then jump over here.
Of Korean history from time immemorial to about 1900.
Yeah, exactly.
1907?
1905.
1905. Okay.
Yes. So if you are a Patreon subscriber, go check that one out first. If you're not a Patreon subscriber, it's only $3 a month. Patreon.com/pickmeupimscared. You'll get access to bonus episodes as they come out. We also have a backlog of bonus episodes. And if you are interested in this topic of Korea, over on our Patreon, there is a full book club we have done walking you through the entirety of Professor Susie Kim, professor of Korean history at Rutgers University's book, Everyday Life in the North Korean Revolution, 1945 to 1950.
Which we will be talking about again, presumably.
Probably in the next episode.
Yeah. And as I said over on Patreon, it is essentially an audiobook of everything.
With commentary.
With me being annoying in the background. That's what we've got.
It's a lot. So even if you don't want to read the book, you could listen to that and you would feel like you read the book.
Yeah. Well, because you kind of did.
I kind of read the book.
You kind of just read the book
a little bit. So today, what our main episode over here is going to cover is a specific period of Korean history in between 1905 and World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And this is basically going to cover a period of imperialism in Korea by the Japanese.
Okay.
So the reason this is important to understand the Korean War, which you would know if you listened to the first episode, but we'll just recap like a sentence. It's like Korea has always been at the crossroads geographically, politically, economically between the United States, Japan, and China and Russia.
Yes.
So all of these forces have always been at play in Korea, and you cannot understand the Korean War and Korea as it exists today, divided, without understanding the intersection of all of these unique interests.
Mm-hmm.
So that's important. The reason there is a North and a South Korea is because of the United States.
Yes.
The reason that there was Japanese imperial control over Korea starting in the year 1905, which is where our episode's going to start, is because of the United States.
And a little bit
Japan.
Yeah.
But, mostly the West viewed Korea as lawless and ungovernable. Mm. They viewed it as an opportunity, a resource, and largely never considered the idea that the Korean people might be able to govern themselves. As soon as the United States showed up in Korea, we were like, oh, yeah. They can't be in charge of this.
Yeah.
Somebody else has got to be in charge of this. And for no good reason. The Korean people were doing fine being in charge of themselves.
Okay.
They were managing fine. So this is really the background understanding.
I mean, there were, not to suggest that, colonization was better, but there were famines.
Yeah, but that was from what? Having to pay tribute to China.
Yeah.
So this is really the intervention of all these different areas in Korea has always been a destabilizing factor.
Yeah.
And really, at a time period where Korea should have been left on its own to prosper, instead,
they experienced one of the most brutal colonizations
imaginable. And this came about because Russia and Japan got into a war that had nothing to do with Korea. Mm-hmm. And at the end of it, the United States showed up and said, we're doing treaties for your Russia-Japan war. Oh, BT dubs. Japan's just in charge of Korea now.
Yeah.
Russia had not been in charge of Korea. The Koreans were like, what? Wait, what?
America was really, we were feeling ourselves.
We were in a vibe at this time.
We were on the come up a little bit. And we were like, everything should just be colonies.
Yes, make everything a colony. And as we talked about in the last episode, white people were like, Japan, they're Asian, but not really. they're kind of Asian like we're white. Like, they're like the white people of Asia. This is literally how Americans, Westerners thought of Japan.
Oh, this is the long quote by that one Fabian
Yes.
socialist.
So if you go listen to our bonus episode, you will hear white liberals being extremely racist and weird about Asia. But suffice it to say, for those of you who are not Patreon subscribers, we've just always fucking been weird about Asia. And we've always viewed Japan as the people most like us in the region, and therefore the people who should rightfully own and control people like Koreans. So 1905, where today's episode starts, is with Japan taking over imperial control in Korea.
Okay.
So, all right. Russia, Japan sign a treaty. The United States shows up, says you belong to you. And Japan now officially has this protectorate over the Korean Peninsula. And we have an explanation for this. It's explained by R.R. Krishnan in a paper titled Early History of U.S. Imperialism, which will be available, like our sources always are, in the notes for the show. Just click show more wherever you are, and it'll be there. And the quote is, although the Japanese colonial rule was brief compared with the duration of the colonial rule of the Western imperialist powers, it was intense and barbaric. Not only did Japan exploit Korea to sustain its imperialist structure and war machine, this is a little precursor coming up to World War II, but it also sought to obliterate Korea as a distinct cultural and national entity by pursuing a policy of Japanese-Korean unity, which is Nissan Itai. Okay? So the type of colonial imperialist control that Japan is exercising over Korea is really genocidal in a lot of ways. They're like, you are Japan.
Yeah.
Korea does not exist anymore.
But like the subordinate Japan.
You are second, smaller Japan that does what we want and helps us.
Yeah.
You are a mini Japan that we just kind of fuck over whenever we want.
Yeah.
Yes. So this was really the approach. So the day that the United States is like, go for it, Japan, take over Korea, Japan's like, bat. And they show up and they hit the front run. So Japan immediately sets to work after this treaty is signed, and the first thing it does is it puts its own police in Korean streets and takes control of key communication systems throughout Korea. So it's like, oh yeah, we get to be your protectorate? Cool. We're here. Our cops are here. Your communications are ours now. And the main source we're going to be using for this book is a man named, it's either pronounced Bruce Cummings or Bruce Cummings. It's spelled like Cummings. I think it's probably pronounced Cummings. I'm so sorry. But it's the same source. If you listen to our bonus episode, we used him at the end. He is the former chair of the history department at the University of Chicago until he retired. He writes a lot about Korean history. His kind of life study is in Korean history. And most of this period that we're talking about in today's episode is going to come from his book, Korea's Place in the Sun, which is a 1-volume mega compilation of Korean history. So he is going to be our main source for this episode, and he explains that this protectorate that was established was done so, quote, at the point of a gun in November of 1905. So the first person who kind of hits the scene in a major notable way involved in this colonization effort is going to be a Japanese resident general named Ito Hirobumi, who we mentioned at the end of our bonus episode. So he entered the Korean palace by force, accompanied by Japanese troops, and was like, hey, what's up? I'm here from Japan. Your country's ours now.
So what happens, by the way, because we had understood that Korea up until this point had like a monarch.
Yes.
Yes. What happens to the monarch? Because they're in the palace.
So we're going to talk about what happens to the monarch. The monarchy situation gets weird. It gets weird. So it gets so weird that I was like, I don't know if this is the correct word I'm allowed to use to describe what's happening. So we'll get into it in a little bit of detail. So let's for a second though talk about what Japan expected when they showed up in Korea. So Japan had recently colonized Taiwan, right? Starting in 1895. They took Taiwan from China during the Sino-Japanese War, and they had a really easy time taking over Taiwan. So they expected when they showed up in Korea, they're like, we've got a game plan for how to do this. It's going to be just like Taiwan. So Taiwan had been a part of China, very obviously, since the 1600s, and Japan and China get into a war, and Taiwan just kind of gets taken over by Japan during the war and becomes like, haha, colony of Japan now. And so the Taiwanese people, though, are not necessarily mad either way. They're just kind of like, oh, shit, all right, I guess we're Japan now, whatever. So this would be the model that Korea would use would be what Japan rather would use and apply in Korea. But what we'll find is that it can't just be stamped on the Korean people, because Korean people are very, very different than the people of Taiwan were. They have different priorities, different histories, different values, and it doesn't go well. So for Japan, they expected this to be easy. They expected you to just show up, put a guy there, and be like, we're in charge now. And then everybody in Korea would be like, fuck, I guess you're in charge now. This is not what happened.
Okay.
Immediately, 1906. So this happens in November 1905. This guy shows up, Ito Hirobumi, and is like, I'm in charge, haha. Starting immediately in 1906 and lasting until 1910, massive protests against Japanese control break out in Korea. We're talking pretty much immediately, massive uprisings occur. Several high-ranking officials under Kojong's leadership, he had been the king, right? Just commit suicide in protest.
Okay.
Mass suicide waves break out. People are like, I would rather die Korean than be controlled by Japan.
God damn.
And yes. So when we say the Korean people were not down to be colonized, they were fucking not down. They were like, absolutely not on my watch. So Kojong himself, the supposed leader of Korea, starts going around to other world powers and is like, hey, something fucked up has happened. Hey, somehow the United States gave us to Japan. We don't know what's going on. Can you help us? We're supposed to be a sovereign nation. Hello. Is anybody there? So in 1907, he sends a delegation of 3 people to the Second Hague Peace Convention. And they're there to be like, hey, we're here from Korea. The United States just gave us to Japan. Can you guys help? This does not go in Korea's favor, though. The Second Hague Peace Convention just rules that Korea actually is not sovereign and that Japan is just now in charge of them.
Cool.
This makes no sense, by the way. There is no political precedent. There's no reason for this other than white people are racist, I think. This is what I think. So, and again, to really understand this, you have to understand that white people in the West view Japan as being the most white people in Asia. So they were like, no, you're all savages. Let Japan be in charge of you.
Got it.
Yeah, that's their mindset. So one of the members of the delegation then commits suicide in protest at The Hague.
God damn.
They're just like, when I tell you the Korean people are like, we are not getting colonized. They are not getting colonized, right? So this actually drummed up so much attention that Japan was like, whoa, this Kojong guy is going too crazy. He's got to step down. He can no longer even just be king in name of Korea. We got to get him out of here. So Japan is like, Kojong, all your people are killing themselves because they'd rather have you than us. That's bad. You step down or we'll kill you, basically. And instead, they put his son in power as a puppet king. Now, his son is severely mentally incapacitated.
Is this the word that you were?
This is the word. I'm like, I don't know the right way to describe this. His son is not mentally fit to be in a decision-making.
Are we in like a sort of Habsburg situation?
Yes.
Where it's like maybe some marriages have happened.
Okay, I don't think that's necessarily the reason why we don't have evidence of that. But it's Habsburg in that this person is severely incapacitated and they are not in a position to be able to have political agency or self-agency, really. So they're like, this guy's in charge now. Ha. So they're like, this guy's in charge now. Ha ha. To try to like make it so the Korean people don't totally freak out. They're like, look, you still have your king. It's just a different king.
That's the guy's son. Come on.
Right, exactly. But it's everybody knows what's going on. So this is how it starts. This is how the colonization of Korea by Japan starts.
Okay, so we're still in like 1907.
We're in 1907. It has been 2 years.
And everyone's committing suicide.
Everybody's committing suicide. The king gets tossed out. His son gets put up who's not capable. This is how it begins. So Ito Hirobumi shows up and is like, oh shit, this is not going well for me. First of all, this Korean army, we got to get rid of it.
Yeah.
They cannot be doing this.
I mean, this does seem like page 1, paragraph 1 of how to do colonialism. Yeah. Which is like, get rid of the army.
Get rid of the army. So he's like, we are forcefully disbanding the Korean army. But the Korean army is like hell you are. We're still the Korean army. So what do? They fight the Japanese army in the streets.
Okay, so they become like a guerrilla.
Well, at first they're not. At first they're like, no, we are the Korean army and you are an outside occupying force and we are defending our country from you. 9,000 people in leadership positions of the Korean army also, what do you think they do in protest?
Commit suicide.
They commit suicide in protest.
Everyone's just... Yeah. So there's like no one left.
This is their move. It's just like, if we can't win, we will die. We will commit suicide. So, Eventually, they are forced to become a guerrilla army, though, like you said. So when this happens, they end up just abdicating to the hills and mountains. Korea is a very mountainous place, right? And bands of guerrilla fighters and peasant militias emerge in the hills, and they come down and they will periodically fight the Japanese in the streets. So who is included in this? There's academia. Academic types. If you remember from our bonus episode, they started to develop a pretty good kind of secular-based academic class there. Culture was developing in Korea before this. So academic types who were very patriotic, who were very into the idea of Korea, they join up. They're like, fuck it, yeah, give me a gun, I'm in. Peasants. Demobilized soldiers, the ones who had not committed suicide in protest, which I kind of feel like, I'm just going to say better.
Probably this
seems better. Yeah, maybe don't kill yourself. Maybe go join a gun and take up the fight. If you're like, I could live or die, maybe do this one instead of the suicide thing, I think. Now, the size of these things. Most of these were small bands of like 100 men or less, but some were several thousand men strong. One of them was recorded as being like 10,000 guys. So pretty significant. And I'm going to call him Cummings, even though I'm not sure that's how his name's pronounced. But Cummings reports Japanese estimates of guerrillas under arms were 69,832 in 1908, with nearly 1,500 clashes between them and Japanese troops. The number dropped to about 25,000 in 1909 and to under 2,000 in 1910. By that time, many insurgents had run off to Manchuria.
Okay.
So there's this period of fighting between 1906, I'm going to say is when it starts, up to 1910, where they are fighting Japan with everything they have.
And they're kind of presumably losing.
They're losing. And the ones who survive are like, in order to keep this fight going, we need to flee Korea and we need to go into Manchuria.
They're doing like a Castro situation.
Right. They're like, we're going to go into another country where we're safe and we're going to regroup and then we're going to come figure this out later. Yes. So many of the leaders of these bands were captured and imprisoned and literally left to starve to death in prisons. These were bad deaths. One resistance leader, Chao, wrote his own epitaph, which said, I was unable to repel the traitors, dispose of our nation's enemies, restore our nation's sovereignty, recover our territory, or hold back our 4,000-year-long righteous way of Chinese civilization from falling to the ground.
What's the story with the Chinese
way of Chinese civilization? You know, look, there were Chinese fighters that were coming and joining them. There were Koreans. And remember, all of the borders, like we talked about in the bonus episode, had been kind of porous.
So, right, for, what did you say his name was? Cho-san?
Cho. Yeah.
Like, he's like, look, we identify more with China.
Yes.
Sort of culturally than with the Japanese. Or we, like, and as a consequence of which, we think of ourselves as like our own thing,
right? But
also in some ways an extension of China.
Yeah, it's also capitalized way of Chinese. It's like how he capitalized it. So I think it's probably inspired by Confucian because there's a lot of Confucian elements. So I think that's probably what he's referencing the most because there's been a lot of crossover between the sides. Yeah. And I remember also from our bonus episode, white people were like Koreans and Chinese are savages. Japan, they're civilized. So a lot of these people were kind of viewed. Yeah. So, this is getting hectic starting off in Korea. It's getting pretty bad. So Yi Wan-hong gets named prime minister to handle affairs on behalf of the Japanese in Korea. And what do Koreans do? They burn his house down. They're like,
hell yeah.
No. So the Korean people from day one, like I said, just like, absolutely not. And then what did they do afterwards? In 1909, a Korean man stabs him in an assassination attempt. Like, so I really want, if you're a person thinking about Korea today, and thinking about North Korea in particular, right? How we're characterizing North Korea. South Korea, spoiler alert, becomes a neo-colony vassal state of the United States. But North Korea is, in many ways, the Korea that the Koreans chose for themselves.
And if I recall correctly, South Korea doesn't hold, like, free open elections till like way late, right?
Yes, it's really, they're under a dictatorship of the United States for years. We're jumping ahead a little bit. But when you think about as North Korea exists today and you think about it, think about these people. Think about these people who are like, I would rather fucking kill myself, kill you, and light everything on fire than be controlled by you.
Yeah, I mean,
this is the spirit of the Korean people.
Okay.
This is really, you hear this, you're just like, oh, fuck yeah, they're giving them hell. So when you look at the people of North Korea who were like, fuck you, we've got a nuclear weapon and we're not talking to you. We'll talk to China. They're cool, man. Think about this, right?
So, yeah.
This is a huge history in the making for our understanding of contemporary Korea.
Right. Like, they understand, like, as a part of, I wouldn't say Korea's origin story, but their, like, modern origin story.
Modern history.
They understand themselves as, like, principally in a position of resistance.
Yes.
Right. Or
Yes.
like, this is like, presumably if you grow up in North Korea, this is like you're learning about George Washington kind of shit.
You are learning about Korean people stabbing the Japanese and lighting their houses on fire when they show
Like, you're reading Korean Johnny Tremaine.
Yes.
Kind of thing where you're like, the brave fighters who repelled colonialism.
Yes.
Kind of thing.
That is
Yeah.
what you were reading, and the Japanese Imperial Army is your first major aggressor. So 1909, Ito himself gets assassinated.
That seems right.
Yeah, they're like, get the fuck out of here. We're killing you now.
They should. I feel like I guess presumably that he was hard to assassinate.
Yes,
Is that
it was hard. It took them a little while to get there, but they were trying. So in August 29th, 1910, Korea officially becomes a colony of Japan because Japan is like, this has to get cracked down hard.
You're no longer a protectorate. You're
No.
no longer mini subordinate Japan. You are just a colony, and we're treating you like a colony.
Exactly. So this is a period of 5 years
Mm-hmm.
that goes from Japan will be the protectorate to you are a fucking colony. And in that 5 years, think about everything that happens.
Everyone's dead.
Everyone's dead. People's
Oh.
houses are getting lit on fire.
Yeah.
So now we are starting officially the Japanese taking official control in Korea. So from 1910 to 1919, resistance to the Japanese occupation, now extremely formal in Korea, grows.
Mm-hmm.
The Japanese arrested as many as 50,000 Koreans in 1912 and 140,000 in 1918 because they were protesting and fighting so hard against them.
Jesus.
Yes. The Korean conspiracy trial of 1912 involved 105 people accused of trying to assassinate the governor general.
Mm-hmm.
It became famous because they had what was referred to as a blatant fabrication of criminal charges against the people accused, vicious torture that they subjected the Korean people to for them to try to extract these confessions, basically. So in 1919, mass movements break out, not just in Korea, but all around the world. Anybody experiencing colonization, even semi-colonization, starts this massive protest movement where they're like, enough is enough. So Korea takes part in this. 33 intellectuals in Korea petitioned formally for independence from Japan on March 1st.
And they're petitioning Japan.
Well, they're petitioning globally, kind of.
Okay.
Because this is a global protest movement.
They're just putting it out.
They're putting it out. They're petitioning Japan technically, but also to the world. They're just like, look, you guys are out here in the world talking about all of these principles of right to self-determination. And
Wilsonian nationalism's a big fucking deal right now.
it really was. Yes.
Not the United Nations, the League of Nations is like a fucking thing.
Exactly this era. So they're like, what about Korea then?
Yeah.
Right?
Put us in the league.
Let's go. And this actually launched months of protests all across Korea. At least 500,000 Koreans participated in these demonstrations, and they happened in 600 different locations.
Okay.
All around the peninsula. So they were so extreme, actually, that Japan had to call in additional reinforcements to squash the protests. They were like, bring in the Navy. We need the boats. I'm like, what are the boats? Okay, all right.
Well,
I guess
the
it's a
people get
peninsula. Yeah.
people get off the boats.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah. They
People
brought the
like
Navy.
what?
In my head, there's just submarines parked along the border of the peninsula.
There are
Just like, we're watching them. We got the Paris.
no
up.
people are.
The Navy does things off the boats as well.
Well, presumably that like. Did you just imagine that it was like Thomas the Tank Engine and that the
Yeah, the boat is the guy. Yeah,
is the guy that was like,
Yeah.
oh, how
The guy's a
okay,
boat. Yeah.
on land.
Well, I guess I assumed that the Navy was specially trained for maritime
But they
activity.
probably still know how to like walk.
I thought that having an amphibious unit was like, wasn't that the Marines in the United States as a special division?
But the Marines are everywhere.
Well,
The
yes.
Navy's everywhere.
Well,
The Navy SEALs killed fucking Osama bin Laden.
right. Okay.
Or, you
But
know.
this is the Japanese Navy, it's called it.
Okay.
All right, to be like, help squash the protest. Yeah, I definitely imagine just a bunch of guys in submarines off the coast or like a big boat just watching them with binoculars going, that doesn't look good. Do we have a cannon? You know, that's definitely what I imagined.
I mean, maybe they shot. I don't. You're telling me the history. Did they shoot the cannons?
You know, I didn't get the details on the cannons. Okay, all I know is they called in the Navy. This is as far as I got in research, and I was like, yeah, okay. And I was picturing it didn't seem weird until you brought up the Thomas the Tank Engine thing, really.
What?
It never occurred to me they would get off the boats, if I'm being perfectly honest.
This is. I mean, it's like the Navy are still, they're just guys.
Look, I'm not a wartime strategist. I'm not familiar with how these people are utilized in combat.
For the pick-me-up, I'm scared, war correspondent.
I should have, maybe this is an opportunity for growth for me. I should learn more about war formations.
Oh, God, if you become one of those people, I'm fucking out. Like,
okay. Well, whatever the case, Japan's like, we need more stuff. Bring in more stuff to help squash this.
Anyone who is available with like a gun,
just show up.
Come on.
The Koreans are going crazy. This is what they're really thinking. So, but it gets bad. It gets very, very bleak. In one incident, the Japanese military locked protesters inside of a church and just lit the church on fire and watched it burn to the ground.
I mean, that is classic. That's like the classic way to kill a bunch of civilians.
Yes. And anybody who tried to escape, they were shot or bayoneted. But most people were burned alive while their relatives were forced to watch outside the church.
Yeah.
I mean, these protests got bad. In the end, Japanese officials counted 553 people dead and over 12,000 arrested. But Korean nationalist sources said 7,500 people were probably killed and 45,000 in total were arrested. So numbers are disputed. So this ultimately led to the destruction of 15 villages entirely.
Okay, I'm going with the Korean nationalist numbers because it's like 500 people die and 15 villages. Come on, that's like...
Yes, exactly. So just outside of Seoul in the Suwon district. So this was documented. Specifically, two were documented in detail, one called Sucheon-ri and one called Kiam-ri. And on April 6, 1919, Japanese soldiers went into Sucheon-ri and they lit the thatch-roofed houses on fire, one by one, while villagers were sleeping inside. And villagers who tried to stop the fires were just shot. Yeah. Very, very, very sad. So this resistance movement that's growing is huge.
So are we... in the realm of like the G word here?
So this has not been described as a genocide to my knowledge. However, what we do know is that use of the term genocide is like so heavily politicized. You know, famously, when the United States has been accused of genocide, we were like, we can't be accused of genocide because we control the genocide court. It's not made for us, so no.
Yeah.
Like, so it's very challenging to understand our understanding based on humanity of genocide is like a targeted attempt to wipe an entire group, an entire population.
Well, I mean, because like, right, you started this, and I don't remember if this was in the Patreon or in this one, but I figure it's worth restating that a part of this was like the erasure of Korea as like a cultural identity.
Yes.
Right.
So definitely cultural genocide.
Yeah.
We definitely see that the Japanese people wanted Korea to not exist anymore. However, they did not want to obliterate the Korean people, which is just as sinister because they wanted to use them as a free labor source. They're a very, very impoverished labor source to help amplify the wealth of Japan. So it's not that they wanted to kill people for being Korean. They wanted to destroy their Korean identity and subsume them and be like, you're Japan now. You're
subordinate.
You're subordinate Japan. You don't have
the same rights. We have created a peasant class.
Right.
Out of whole cloth.
Right. But, you know, when we talk about just sheer volume and brutality of the oppression of the Korean people, I think anybody with a human heart and soul would see a relationship, see similarities between genocides we're familiar with, like Palestine, the Armenian genocide, yes, and what the Korean people were undergoing at this time. Communists, though, it's important to know, were actually really influential in this resistance. So a lot of people have a hard time conceptualizing the fact that North Korea today is communist by choice. And when you hear Americans tell the story or Westerners tell the story, it's almost like the USSR tricked the North or forced the North into being communist. But this is completely ahistorical, which anybody who listened to our book club with Susie Kim's book knows this is not historical. The Korean people were naturally interested in communism, as many people who experience colonization and imperialism are. They view communism as a liberation ideology.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what was going on in the Korean Peninsula.
And we are in 1919
Yes.
thereabouts. So, right, like the Soviet Union is popping off. So there is like, this is before what we've described as the Soviet Union's flop era.
Yes.
Right. It is still like a shining beacon.
Exactly.
To, like oppressed people around the world.
Yeah. So Russia had just experienced their revolution in 1917. There was 3 years of civil war.
Yeah.
So around the time this is happening, they're winning the civil war. They're holding it down. And the world is, yes, the colonized and oppressed people of the world are looking at Russia going, we could have a different system. Look, They did it. The peasants rose up in Russia. They took over the czar. And now, look, they've got this whole new government that's trying to free them. Mm-hmm. We could have that. And it really did shape the nature of resistance in Korea at this time. The Korean representative to the Executive Committee of the Communist International in 1919 directly attributed the Russian Revolution with having, quote, woken up the Korean masses, inspiring them with aspirations for a new life. Reporting on the founding of the Korean Socialist Party, he also spoke with the party's program, which sought to, quote, free Korea from the yoke of Japanese imperialism and capitalistic exploitation. And Susie Kim, the historian that, we will be talking more about in next week's episode, said of this time, for those under colonial rule, the alternative offered by the revolution in Russia was compelling, particularly for its anti-imperialist program. So really, the idea that the Korean people experiencing imperialism would not be drawn into an explicitly anti-imperialist ideology is foolish to believe. It's foolish to believe the Korean people would not be interested in communism as they are actively experiencing the horrific brunt end of brutal colonization and imperialism at home. Mm-hmm. So just anybody out there who's like, the Korean people did not want to become, you're wrong and you're a ding-dong. It's a ding-dong position to have.
I do have a question about, right, like in other sort of anti-imperialist movements around the world, somewhat most famously in China, there is like a split that eventually becomes like really intense and turns into a civil war.
Nationalists.
Between nationalists like Chiang Kai-shek types and Mao types.
So we're going to talk about this, but what's really, really amazing in Korea, and the reason why Korean communism today still has the nationalism of an oppressed people's identity, which you and I often talk about, and there's actually an argument break scheduled in this episode for you and I to debate this exact thing. So we will get to it, but just to let you know, the reason why this becomes less of an issue in Korea is because, first of all, the imperialism of Japan is so brutal. These people are like, we have to work together.
Yeah.
And second of all, because of Kim Il-sung.
Okay.
Kim Il-sung does one thing that actually unites the nationalists and the communists together.
Okay.
And we'll talk about it. But basically, when the Japanese compile a list of names of nationalists who had opposed them, and they're set to be completely maybe executed, definitely fucked with by the Japanese government, Kim Il-sung, even though the communists are technically enemies of the nationalists in that way, he and his men break into the office holding the names of these Korean nationalists, and they destroy them.
Oh, cool.
So this is why the Korean people end up getting super into Kim Il-sung, and they're like, oh my God, like, no, he really is about the Korean people. He will bring us together. And this actually does a lot of work to unite them together. So
gotcha.
This is going on 1919. Things are popping off all around the world, especially in Korea. And Japan is like, we need to crack down harder. Mm-hmm. So Japan is really having this like existential crisis when it comes to Korea. Korea had not been complying with Japan the way Taiwan had. And they're aware of this. And they're like, we really thought it was so easy in Taiwan. It would be so easy to just steal Korea too. So one colonial official says, quote, what can be done with incentives in Taiwan must be done with coercion in Korea. So this is what one Japanese official says. Okay, we're learning. In Taiwan, we could just be like, we'll give you something kind of shiny if you listen to it. No, the Korean people are like, I will die by my own hand before I am subjugated to you. So like, we have to force these people to play ball. So in the first decade of their rule, Japanese colonizers pushed a very heavy-handed military policy as a result of this. Teachers in classrooms showed up in military uniforms and carried swords just to further terrify the students into submission.
This is, for every beleaguered, like, public school teacher in America, they're like, okay, look, I'm not in favor of this colonialism thing. However, could you give us a sword?
The sword might be useful.
The sword might be useful.
It might be useful. Okay. Also, we've got the government general, like the governor general kind of figure. They stand above Korean society, and they are the ones who are like now in charge of everything. Japan then stations this massive army in Korea of their men, both for total control, obviously, but also because they're like, oh, this is strategically advantageous for us because of Korea's location. It kind of is like a lookout point for us, whatever. But it becomes like this imposing thing. Like you're in Korea, you're like, oh shit, there's like a lot of people from the Japanese army here now all of a sudden. Every governor general that exists comes from this military. So you've got the big military there. You've got the governor general, who's the most important person now in Korean society. And all of those governor generals come from the military from Japan. Interrogation and torture becomes super commonplace throughout Korea. Men, women, children, they're beaten, they're bayoneted, they're burned with hot irons, they're forced to confess to what organizing are you doing? Are you with the communists? Are you with the nationalists? Are you rising up against Japan? They're just tormented by these Japanese military men. Prisoners have their bones dislocated, their flesh pinched out, they're suffocated, they're starved, they're dehydrated. I mean, this torture process becomes such a commonplace way of trying to subjugate the Korean people to the whims of Japan. It's getting reported on by Western missionaries even.
Mm-hmm.
Like Western missionaries are like, hey, I know we were like kind of in favor of Japan being in charge of Korea, but like shit's getting kind of fucked up.
I mean, this is right, like especially like a lot of the like sort of like American progressive movement ends up being missionaries at this time. We saw this in like the reporting on the Armenian genocide, right? Where it's like they show up and they're like, wow, you guys seem to torture a lot of people. That's crazy. And so like in today's world, the missionary has had a ancillary function to colonialism. I think a lot of missionaries were just straight up like John Dewey progressive type motherfuckers.
Yes, and that's kind of what we talked about in our bonus episode for this. Some of the missionaries, they did think Japan, because they did view the Korean people as savages that needed to be civilized because they're fucking weird racists. They did view Japan as like, oh, that'll be good. And then they get there and they're like,
oh, shit.
The human rights, So it's just very interesting, weird. It's still racist. They're not like saviors. But one wrote quite a bit about flogging, which was the most common torture method. So I'm going to read this. It is going to be a hard listen. So everybody get ready, get prepared. I'm just going to read this because I think it's really important to understand what the Korean people went through. So the supposed criminal, who could literally be a child, it could be anybody just accused of not being into being totally colonized by the Japanese government, they'd be placed on a rack or a cross, and they'd be beaten over their legs and their buttocks with bamboo rods. And the sentence would be administered over consecutive days, so the pain was drawn out. So you'd be beaten over wounds that were already open. And the beatings would cause gangrene. Sometimes the infections would be so severe they would lead to death. Large areas of the skin and underlying tissue would get basically removed, like would fall off of the body because the beatings were so severe. One nurse was talking about this, and she's like, every time I would have to touch a raw surface, the exposed muscle fibers would twitch and people would be screaming in agony. I mean, it was very, very, very severe. So this is how Japan was attempting to control Korea. Now that they're like, oh shit, they're not listening the way Taiwan did, we're going to exercise maximum brutal crackdown. So by 1912, Seoul had a population of around 277,000 people. 240,000-ish were Koreans. 38,000 were Japanese. There was also 700-ish Chinese people, around 100 Americans living there as well. But really, you look at this makeup, this is huge. It's like over, 10% of the population now is Japanese. So in terms of the cultural genocide stuff we were talking about, Korean people start to get forced to wear Japanese clothes. Korean newspapers get outlawed. Certain things start happening where it's like, well, if you dress in the traditional Korean or Japanese way, then you'll get access to this special thing that's like an ID card. And now the ID card will grant you all of these ways to interact in society. But if you refuse to assimilate like that, you don't get the ID card and you can't do all this stuff we set up. Things like this started becoming commonplace. So people were really getting forced and cajoled into losing their Korean identity and just becoming a lesser version of Japanese, basically.
If I recall correctly from the Suzy Kim book, at some point there is an attempt to sort of replace Korean as a language.
Yes, and
Yeah.
people's names, which we'll get into later. So World War I happens. This is between 1914 and 1918, and this doesn't actually adversely affect Japan that much. It actually brings a lot of financial opportunities to them, and they kind of thrive. So they were the only uninvolved major power, and because of that, their exports go through the roof. They enjoy full employment. They're growing rapidly. They're enjoying high prices for their exports. And this makes a lot of money in Japan available for them to invest in Korea. Also, at this time, Korean landlords started profiting.
Mhm.
And we're going to talk about this in a second. But Japan was very strategic in trying to cozy up to the small existing kind of landowning class of Koreans that were there.
I mean, this is like
Standard.
every colonized people has had like a class that is like
Collaborator class.
Yeah.
Exactly. So colonial authorities passed laws starting around this decade as well, from 1910 to like 1919, where they inhibited the formation of like Korean business. There was limits on how much Korean business could be developed. So by the end of this decade, Japanese-owned firms would account for 70% of the total amount of capital that could be distributed to business, and Japanese-Korean combo firms for 10%, and purely Korean firms would be just like 18% of the economy in general. So that brings us to 1920s, right? So what's going on in Korea in the 1920s? As Cumming writes, there's forced growth and rapid development going on in Japan and also in Korea. And he says, politically, Koreans could barely breathe. But economically, there was significant, if unevenly distributed, growth. So the growth was clearly designed to support Japanese people, not Korean people, right? Obviously, that's the whole point of imperialism and colonization. But agricultural output rose throughout the 1920s. There was the Oriental Development Company, and they organized and funded industrial and agricultural projects. They ended up owning more than 20% of Korea's total arable land.
And is this a Korean company or a Japanese company?
No, this is a Japanese company.
Okay.
So they employed an army of officials who would fan out through the countryside to supervise agricultural production. Now, remember, arable land in Korea is hard to come by. If you listen to our bonus episode, you know it's very, very mountainous terrain, especially in the northern half. There's hardly any farmable land. Like, it's very challenging. So this is a major issue. A lot of the original Koreans had been nomadic, right? They'd been kind of traveling hill people because of, you know, the weather patterns, the mountains, etc. The Colonial Bank of Korea gets formed, and they end up performing central banking functions. So they regulate interest rates, they provide credit to different businesses, most of them Japanese. Industrialization begins to take off. Semi-official companies, conglomerates like Mitsubishi, start laying railways, they build ports, they install these modern factories, and land reform happens. So the traditional landholding system kind of gets shifted through new contract laws and starts to exist to benefit Japan, but also to benefit more, like we said, the collaborator class, the moneyed class that had existed in Korea.
I mean, so essentially Korea is somewhat against its will being turned into a moderate cap state.
Yes.
Right. And I always think about like the Marx articles that he wrote for the New York Tribune about India that are a little bit of a hard read.
Yeah. Marx has some interesting opinions on ethnic issues.
but like you do kind of understand what he's explaining, which is like, oh, like India is going to have to, like, colonialism will have the knock-on effect of modernizing India, right?
Yes.
And that is what's happening here.
Exactly. So contractual property rights also basically made it so that the traditional aristocracy of Korea had their rights, like, enshrined. So they would be called yangban. That was the traditional aristocracy. So the yangban landlords actually got benefits out of this. They knew how to get their land registered under this new system. But also, if you were an illiterate peasant, the opposite would be the case. You would have no idea how to secure property rights or anything to protect you. So most landlords were actually content to sit back and let Japanese officials increase output on their land. They're like, hey, you know, we're making money too, whatever. And bureaucracy really takes over in Korea.
Your favorite thing. You're like, oh my God, I love the Japanese so much for their capacity.
Well, they used it for evil. They didn't use bureaucracy for good.
Mm-hmm.
They used it for evil.
That's most bureaucracy is used for evil.
I refuse to see it. So Cummings writes, Japan did not send Korea conquerors like Cecil Rhodes, but chose the civil service bureaucrat as the model overlord.
Mm-hmm.
Now, They strengthened existing local clerks, wealthy families. They also added a centrally controlled, very mobile national police force to Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And Cummings says, black-coated policemen kept order and helped bring in the harvest, manning the ramparts of the rice production circuit, from paddy field to middleman to storehouse to export platform, and thence to Japan. And Japan really had developed this system in Taiwan, and they exported it, obviously, to Korea. And so that is something they tried to enforce in Korea like they had in Taiwan, but this time with force. So the modernization that you were talking about, yeah, it did occur. Japan at this time is described as modernizing Korea. Koreans do not like it when you use this term, though. They beg to differ, right?
Yeah.
Because, yeah, sure, it was a period of massive growth, but the profits all went to Japan at the expense of the Korean people. So Korea is like, what is modern about this? And Susan Kim actually writes about this in her book. She's like, we describe it as modernization. Modern for whom? Modern for what? What intuitively makes something more modern? And how are we using this word? And, it's actually a deeply offensive way to the Korean people to describe what they experienced. They experienced colonization. They did not experience modernization. So these so-called also modern constructions were modeled architecturally and sometimes even in terms of their strategy and development after European and Western design. Mm-hmm. So the Korean people are like, why is the West inherently more modern than anything we would develop, right?
To be clear, I'm not making an argument for
I know.
I'm just like, okay, I understand that like capitalism is now happening on a more intense level in Korea.
Exactly. Yeah. So the reason I bring this up actually is that there are some Japanese animes that are banned in Korea because the animes basically will talk about Korea being ungrateful for how much Japan modernized it. Mm-hmm. Like those people were like backward savages. They should be happy for what we did to them. And a lot of people in Korea are like, fuck this, like absolutely no. And it's banned. But this really was the mindset of Japan. They're like, they should be grateful. Look at all the cool things we're bringing them. And again, this was all done at the end of the barrel of gun. Mm-hmm. So Japan, though, sees that this is not a sustainable system because the Korean people are not allowing themselves to be subjugated, right? So the Korean people are like, fuck this. And Japan is like, you know what? You are going to be independent one day. Mm-hmm. We promise. Just know right now.
This is like the United States and the Philippines where it's like, no. Once we like set things up so that you can consistently profit us once you're independent,
mm-hmm. You're going to be free.
Yeah.
You're going to be totally free. Don't worry about it. So they're like, look, to prove to you that you're going to be free, we'll make some concessions to get you ready for being in charge of yourselves. Right now, you're not ready because you're like backwards, uncivilized savages. But like we, Japan, are going to teach you how to be civilized. So to get you ready for your big day of independence, Korea, we're going to let you do some things. You remember how we banned all the newspapers and the books?
Oh, they're going to put,
you can bring them
back.
I
feel like, okay, this is the thing. Not to, like, I'm not advocating for this, but if you're a colonial power,
don't let them bring back the books.
Like, and you have decided to, like, torture and murder thousands of people for a few years.
Yeah.
I gotta let you know, like, you've committed to that as, like, this is who you are now. And it's like, you can't.
No.
You
bringing
can't
back the books isn't going
to that's not gonna.
No, it's not gonna cut it. But they do have to allow some freedom of speech, they think, right? And allowing that little bit of opportunity creates more nationalist, socialist, and communist resistance groups.
Yeah, because obviously they're like, we
can write? Oh, fuck this, I'm writing it.
I just gotta say, as a person who has had many a radical mimeographed, photocopied zine foisted upon me.
Yes, they're making radical zines.
People with, let's call them outside of the mainstream ideas are always the first ones to, like, they're like,
yeah, let me go. Yeah. So some of these groups are operating out in the open. Some are still like, we don't trust you. We're keeping this behind closed doors. We're not telling anybody. But, like the rest of the world, the Korean resistance divides itself. You've got some people who are sympathetic to Western democratic capitalism. They're like, we just want like civil liberties.
Yeah.
We just want more liberty. They think the Western way of doing capitalism will grant them independence, and that will be enough. And then you have the new USSR-aligned pro-Lenin camp of socialists.
Yeah.
Okay, so Cummings says the largest split brought Korea into the mainstream of world history after World War I. It was between liberal idealism and socialism, between Wilson and Lenin, as you mentioned, the Wilsonian idea. Exactly. Yeah. So he continues and says, liberals had the advantage of association with Wilson's ideals of self-determination and the disadvantage that the United States was not interested in supporting Korean independence. Furthermore, their social base within Korea was very slim, so most people were not there. There were some, but He continues, the socialists had the disadvantage of Japanese police action, which targeted and walked off to jail anyone espousing quote-unquote Bolshevik ideas, and the advantage of a potentially large mass base and a spirit of sacrifice on behalf of Korea, so that by the end of the 1920s, they were leading the Korean resistance movement. Mm-hmm. So the communists were like, even though the police were shutting them down, there were more of them, it was more appealing, and they ended up being the ones who really dominated this landscape.
I also got to say, at no point in history has anyone ever written a liberal document that is inspiring.
No. It's always like, well, we could do this.
It's just like even like the Declaration of Independence, and it's like you get past like the first paragraph of it, and you're like, okay, this is boring now.
Yeah.
Like it's just like it's a boring ideology.
It is.
It's
not inspiring. You're right. So Cummings goes on to quote a scholar of Korean communism named Dae-suk Seo. So he says, as a preeminent scholar of Korean communism, Dae-suk Seo put it, leftists and communists succeeded in wresting control of the Korean Revolution from the nationalists. They planted a deep core of communist influence among the Korean people, particularly the students, youth groups, laborers, and peasants. Their fortitude and at times obstinate determination to succeed had a profound influence on Korean intellectuals and writers. To the older Koreans who had groveled so long before seemingly endless foreign suppression, communism seemed a new hope and a magic touch. For Koreans in general, the sacrifices of the communists, if not the idea of communism, made strong appeal, far stronger than any occasional bomb-throwing exercise of the nationalists. Yeah. The haggard appearance of the communists suffering from torture, their stern and disciplined attitude towards the common enemy of all Koreans had a far-reaching effect on the people. So, in the hearts and minds of the resistance, the communists were really the ones. And we talked about this. Kim Il-sung really united the nationalists and the communists from that one action as well, which we'll see. But communism in Korea really took hold as the dominant resistance ideology. So the Korean Communist Party, the KCP, was officially founded in Korea in 1925. And one of the main organizers was a man named Pak Hun-young. Keep him in mind because he'll later become the leader of the Korean Communist movement in South Korea, in the southern half of Korea, after it's divided in 1945. So Krishnan, the author who wrote the paper we referenced earlier, said, the communists and the leftists came to dominate the Korean nationalist movement after 1925, i.e. during the most brutal phase of colonial rule, so much that leftism became almost synonymous with opposition to Japan. Communist resistance took on a nationalistic, patriotic aura. Now, Here is our scheduled time to discuss this.
Okay.
So, I think this is interesting because a point of contention you and I always have is about the utility of nationalism for a colonized or oppressed people.
Well, yeah, okay. I don't know if that, I think, how do I put this? There's that, so Gregory Suni makes this point in some, not in his book, but in some article he wrote where he's like, look, here's the thing. Cultures interpenetrate one another, that's just the nature of people. Because they move there, that you can't put them in one spot.
Yes.
And so whatever utility it might have as a rallying cry, that gun is getting pointed back at you eventually, because no matter what, there will be some outgroup in the space. Okay. This makes you understand what I'm saying, right? There's no such thing, presumably, as a people where it's we have one origin story, we have clearly defined
right,
Armenia is the closest you can get, but there's they didn't have a country until 1920, right.
So yeah, if we do the nation thing where it's okay, you're a people who share a common territory, a common language, a common history.
There's always going to be some outgroup that happens to exist within those borders
that doesn't fit into that.
That doesn't fit into that. And Habermas makes, I think it's in the Age of Nationalism or whatever, makes the line or makes the point that the people who draw the borders are very rarely cognizant of the people who have to live within them.
Yes.
Right. And so that's like my thing is like as a utility, if you're aiming for socialism as your thing, like you do have to, and like not to get all like French about it, uh, like accommodate for like difference or whatever, like for the fact that people are fucking different.
Well, I think that can be accommodated within a nationalist framework. So, Kim, I think it was Kim Jong-il who ultimately wrote about this, who said that nationalism was actually ended up being very important for communism in Korea. And he went on to say, this is not the bourgeois nationalism of an oppressor. This is not the nationalism of a group of people who imagine they are fighting some invisible evil seeking to take their power from them. This is the rallying cry for a marginalized people who are watching their culture, their identity, their nation be erased, be taken from them. There's a text actually that came out of North Korea that is widely interpreted incorrectly to make it sound like North Korea is trying to build an ethno-state. And what they were talking about is how the Americans came and basically did settler colonization in Korea and started mating with Korean women to produce children that were neither Korean nor American. And what they're talking about is like you are trying to destroy the Korean identity. And a lot of Westerners who want to hate North Korea are like, oh my God, they want to build an ethno-state. They're against race mixing. But if you read the full text, it's very obvious they're not against race mixing. They're calling it for what it is. They're like, you are doing settler colonization. You are trying to erase the Korean identity. And they don't actually have a problem with foreigners living in their land. They don't actually have a problem with people of different races being together. What they have a problem with is the structural strategic attempt to erase their identity. And when you know about the history of the Korean people and how much they've struggled to maintain their identity, their sense of nation, their sense of themselves is the thing that has allowed them to conceptualize of themselves as a group worth defending against outside invaders.
One of the things that is interesting and why I pointed out how much of the sort of like modern origin story, not the like since time immemorial story, is an origin story about resistance, is that you get this like very like, well, the thing that binds us together, our like national myth, so to speak, becomes resistant. Like it ceases to be like, back in the day, someone killed a dragon and now we have a country or whatever fucking like English bullshit. Where the like, sorry, I was just watching a bunch of people try to describe what their Englishness entailed, and I was like,
but yeah, no, it really is. It's like we have fought off outside aggressors who attempted to steal our identity and our land from us, who have attempted to kill us and subjugate us to their will.
And I think like, right, like so far as it goes, that seems whatever. Like I'm like not gonna like get mad at oppressed people for being like, we have an origin story that helps us get through brutal conditions and resistance.
Yes.
And it, like I'm just sort of like, if you like eventually you will end up with like a like, I keep going back to the Armenian thing because it's in the same time period, but it's like you're gonna wind up with like the Nagorno-Karabakh situation where it's like, well, who is supposed to be here? Right. Like, and that seems...
Well, I think what's interesting about... Because in North Korea today, they are communist, right? But they think that their national identity is important to their interpretation of communism. They're like, we are communists because we perceive of ourselves as a nation, as a group of people, and we want to defend our nation. We want to defend ourselves. That is why we are communists. Communism is our liberation ideology as a nation. And for them, these two experiences are so interlinked. And they're like, our nationalism is not the nationalism of a bourgeois power, of a capitalist entity, of the rich, right? Like our nationalism is the nationalism of communism. Our nation came together to do this.
Yeah, and again, that's like, right, like the link is so deep between like resistance ideology and communism, like nationalism is resistance ideology and communism, that again, it's also hard to talk about things in isolation. Because it's like, well, if there were some period in the long 20th century yada yada where North Korea was just like allowed to chill, right, like we might see like we might have like a different thing happen. But it's like, they have not really been allowed to fucking chill. So their conception of themselves as a nation is still relevant because they have to
conceive of an outside other who seeks to destroy that.
Yeah.
And so when you have to conceive of an outside nation who seeks to destroy you, it naturally makes you conceive of yourself as a nation that is trying to survive.
Yeah. And so, again, like, I don't actually think there's a dispute here.
No. I just think it's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I think, like, it's also, it does feel a little bit like playing Risk talking about stuff like this.
Yeah.
It's like,
well,
we're an Outwater village, motherfucker.
This is my whole argument, though, for why I don't dismiss nationalism outright. I think for, marginalized people, nationalism can be a rallying cry to conceive of themselves as a people worth defending against imperialism and colonization.
Yeah, I mean...
And I think North Korea, in particular, Korea in general, is a great example of that.
Yeah, I like you will find yourself reading a lot of, like, the Chiang Kai-sheks of the world.
Yeah,
like, like, if you go down that route, that is eventually,
this
in a lot of cases,
that North Korea offers an interesting alternative to that, a communist nationalism.
You will get really freaky things.
I think if you read Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il's takes on nationalism and communism, they are very normal sounding and smart. So none of this changes the fact that nationalism was a motivating factor in Korea during this time, as we talked about. But there were the nationalists who were Western aligned and pro-capitalist, the Chiang Kai-sheks, if you will. So the Korean Provisional Government, KPG, in Shanghai included someone who will be important in later episodes, Syngman Rhee. Right? He literally became the American-backed puppet dictator of South Korea.
And he's like Catholic, right? Is this?
I think he is. Yeah, he had.
This is like there's like a
in the West felt good about. Yeah.
No, because like this is like Vietnam too. Like the South.
Yeah.
South Vietnamese guy is Catholic, and I was like, what the fuck is? Like the Catholic Church needs to fucking.
Yeah, it's really weird. Yeah. So in 1927. A nationalist group is called the Singan Ho, which is a coalition of moderate nationalists with a few left-wingers involved. So these would be the less super capitalist ones, but whatever. The Japanese actually encouraged this because they were like, this is going to be where we safely corral all the left-wing dissent.
Like, we are going to essentially create like a controlled opposition party.
Yes, exactly. So we're just going to shove them all in here, and then it won't be that extreme. That's fine. Yeah, do that. So they were like, yeah, we're going to corral, we're going to co-opt, we're going to moderate all these independent activists going on in the left and the right. Okay, put them both in there. That's just where they're going to go.
This is, it's also like what do they call it? It's like the strategy of tension thing where it's like, well, if you want a bunch of people in a coalition who can't fucking get along,
they're not going to accomplish much.
But we're going to have, like, this is going to be so easy.
Right. So by 1929, this group had 37,000 members spread across 138 branches. And they were like, look, we got some basic things we want to do. We want people to study the Korean language so it doesn't die out, right? We want to have more freedom of expression. Very, very basic demands. But, the communists really did end up subsuming the Korean nationalist movement. And the thing that happened with Kim Il-sung and the papers was a really big deal. So Christian talks about this and says, the communists succeeded in wresting control of the Korean Revolution from the nationalists, right? We talked about this. This is the quote. They planted a deep core of communist influence among the Korean people, particularly the students, the youth groups, blah, 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 blah. For Korean in general, the sacrifices of the communists were very, very appealing. Their haggard attitudes. We talked about all this, right? They were like,
their haggard attitude?
Their haggard appearances.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So basically, what he was talking about when he said this, though, that's important to remember is that there was a romance about the Korean communist resistance.
Okay, this is, I told you the thing I had told my ex-girlfriend.
What?
Like, every liberal chick wants to be kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army.
Yes. There was something that even if you weren't a communist, to revisit this quote and really think about this, even if you weren't a communist, you wanted the Japanese out of your country.
Yeah.
And to look at a communist who's been held in prison, tortured, haggard looking, falling apart, and it's just like, I do not give a fuck. I will die for this cause.
Well, this is like...
You look at them, how are you not inspired?
This is also the, like, Cuba experience where it's, like, all the guys with the cool beards and the mouth. Like, you get...
You really think the beards are a big deal here? You and the United States government. Because remember, they were like, maybe Fidel Castro's power's in his beard. Let's try to make him lose...
No, there's this book. It's a photo book that's, like, two, like, American-Cuban journalists. It's called Fidel's Cuba. I can't remember that. My aunt randomly gave it to me when I was like 12.
Cool.
But it's just like they like followed along with and like hung out with Castro and Guevara while they were like guerrilla fighters or whatever.
Yes.
And the photographers are like really good at taking pictures.
Oh, yes. I remember this book. Yes.
They just look so hot.
Yeah.
Everyone is just so, and you're just like,
they're really hot. It's true.
okay, like.
But this is what happened. Yeah. It was the reason why people are like, the communists subsumed the movement is truly that even if you were a nationalist, the communists were fighting for your national liberation.
Yeah.
So you couldn't help but be.
Like you were like, hell yeah, like we can get down, like when this is all over and they make me read the Grundrisse, I'm pissed at them, but until then.
Everybody was really like, they saw their dedication. They saw they were about it, right?
Yeah.
They were like, these people are about us. They're about our collective liberation. So there was also other left-wing movements that weren't communist. Like there was an anarchist movement in Korea. There were other resistance groups existing, even in exile, not in Korea, to fight for Korean liberation. There was Shin Chae-ho, who edited the Hwasong Sinmun, the Capital Gazette, in 1905. He actually went into exile in China in 1910. He joined the Korean Provisional Government in Shanghai in 1919, and he set up another exile government in 1923 that advocated for armed struggle against the Japanese. He actually became an anarchist. So he was writing from outside of Korea about Korean liberation as an anarchist, right?
Dude,
there was other people.
I gotta say, like, if you're like an American anarchist and you like live and like you have like 20 people living in like a house and you like brew your own kombucha or whatever, you gotta look at like global anarchists and just be like, we suck.
Yeah, I mean, they're doing a lot. He founded a Korean anarchist group in Beijing, and Japanese agents actually arrested him when he attempted to visit Taiwan. And then they locked him up for 10 years, and he died of a cerebral hemorrhage in 1936. So, despite these growing left-wing movements throughout Korea of resistance, there was only so much they could get away with. Cummings writes, sharp police repression, internal factionalism made it impossible to sustain radical groups over time. Many nationalist and communist leaders were thrown in jail in the late 1920s and early 1930s, only to emerge again in 1945. So new control approaches were developed also alongside this. So they were like, look, we can't be super militaristic in our oppression like we used to be because people are starting to get mad, but we're still going to control these people. So how do we get creative with it? And this was the task of the Japanese colonial powers there, right? So first, they employed techniques of discrimination very clearly. They wrote new laws establishing extensive legalized systems of racial discrimination against Koreans to formally make them second-class citizens in their own country.
Again, I don't think like once you have embarked upon the path of just killing everyone,
you kind of just feel like you should just keep killing everybody.
Well, it's just like that's all you have,
right?
Like because like no, it's like people aren't going to be like, well, listen, you killed like every one of my family members, but now I just like have to use a different water fountain or whatever. Because like it's like
right. Well, they're still hurting people, but you got to be like, I am a communist revolutionary, and they're like, get up, lock them up. But if you're just like, I don't think I like this, they're like, well, divide and conquer strategy, discriminate, boom.
But you understand, like, where it's like, people aren't going to forget that you killed it.
Yeah, they're not. They're really not. So the main thing that Japan started utilizing in Korea to control the masses was these divide and conquer techniques. So colonial leaders were really honing in on this skill because they found that it could be very effective at controlling the rioting Korean people. So the resident bishop of the Methodist Episcopal Church, Herbert Welch, wrote in May of 1920 that while many Koreans still demanded immediate independence, quote, some of the most intelligent and far-seeing Koreans are persuaded that there is no hope of speedy independence, and they must settle down for a long period to build up the Korean people in physical conditions, in knowledge, in morality, and in the ability to handle government concerns. So this is kind of the mindset. You're like, well, some of the Korean people are like, I understand Japan. Like, pick me kind of.
Well, it's also like
class.
If you are like, look, I'd like not to defend these people or whatever, but it is like if you are. Do you remember being 17?
Not vividly.
Not,
But I
not like
do
me,
remember a little.
but like if you are like intelligent and ambitious or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
you're just kind of like, well, this is a fucking system we've got, and like I would like to be like I have ambitions that I would like to accomplish
Right.
of my like that. And you
You're
understand.
like, I want to live through it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so these were mostly a certain type of people that this man was writing about. So really, the Japanese occupying force did attempt to make some Koreans sympathetic to their cause and aims through reward systems, the way that they had in Taiwan that had been very effective there. It wasn't super effective in Korea. Remember, they're like, we have to coerce these people. But a few people, it was effective for them. And this would be the people from more upper-class backgrounds. So Cummings wrote about this and said, Japan fractured the Korean national psyche, pitting Korean against Korean. And this usually happened along class lines, which also ironically made Korea more rife for communism.
Yeah.
They really exacerbated the class divisions between
Can
the
you
Korean
imagine? Like, look, had Japan been like, actually, you know what we should do? We should do like Japan communism and like really activate like the like peasant class and like the small, presumably proletarian.
Yeah, rise them up.
And be like, kill your landlord.
Yeah, they really activated the wrong class here.
And like we are like, because it's like there are just more of them.
Yeah.
Have they just been like, we are actually your liberators from the landlords and the wealthy?
They might have gotten away with it for longer.
We could be talking about Japan, Korea today.
We could. So there was a Korean organization called the Ilchinho, or Unity and Progress Society. They ended up enrolling large numbers of Koreans into these new mass organizations that would back Japan's policies. And connections to the upper class left over from Korea were designed to co-opt and thwart dissent, according to Cummings. Not necessarily to give Koreans a meaningful role in the state apparatus, but just to be like, we got some of them on our side. So Korean aristocracy was viewed at this time as being useful to Japan. They're like, we're going to try to win over the aristocracy. And the colonial administrations pensioned off 84 aristocrats and over 3,600 civil service officials because they had a detailed knowledge of the Korean upper class.
Mm-hmm.
So higher scholar officials were replaced by the Japanese, but Korean landlords were allowed to retain their holdings and encouraged to continue disciplining peasants and extracting rice for export. So they were like, you, Korean landlord class, do our dirty work for us. So they hate you instead of us. So they don't view this as a Japan thing.
Mm-hmm.
They're just like, oh, life is hard. I'm in misery. I'm a peasant. So we've got a quote from Cummings on this that says, these policies rooted Korean landlords more firmly to the localities by snipping their web of connections to political office in Seoul and using their traditional power and legitimacy to extract rice from peasants for the export market, more stably and effectively than if the Japanese had done it themselves, although many Japanese families did come to Korea and buy up land too. So they also introduced a cultural policy in the 1920s where Korean commerce was targeted in the capitalistic class with further incentives. So one source argued for a tremendous increase in the number of Korean entrepreneurs, right? I mean, this didn't really happen. By the end of this decade, Koreans only had about 3% of the total kind of capital in this market. But, they were like, the Japanese were really looking at this strategically. They're like, if we increase the finances, the capital, the access, the power of some Korean businesses, this might actually work to our advantage. And there were Korean capitalists who did benefit from this, even if there weren't a lot. There were wholesalers, brokers, merchants who dealt in grain or grain-based liquor. There were activities like mushrooming, going on.
Presumably not the magic kind.
No. So some Korean scholars argued that a national bourgeoisie began to develop in the 1920s as a growing idea of Korean nationalism.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is kind of like when you think about like marginalized people here in the United States who are like, if we can just become like the owning class.
This is it's the talented 10th bullshit.
Yes,
right.
Exactly. Yes. So Korean growth rates took off in the 1930s, and we're going to see that. But basically what's to know about this area leading up to it is that a middle class started to emerge amongst the Korean people as well. So let's see if I can find this like quote about the Korean middle class. Here we go. This is actually from Susie Kim. Streetcars rattled on the streets of Seoul, which were lined with modern shops and department stores. Increasing numbers of urban residents were drawn to the novelties of modern life, with talkies and taxis, modern girls and modern boys, miniskirts and bell-bottom trousers, as well as revue girls, jazz, and radio. And this started as early as the 1930s. Small urban middle class began going to the movies, listening to the radio, buying cosmetics, dressing in latest fashions. And they also, in addition to giving some Koreans special privileges as members of the capitalist class, right, or even just of the middle class as like merchants or whatever, they gave some Korean people jobs in the police and military too, which is also
this is
standard
right, like make
colonization.
people dependent upon your authority for their livelihood, and then they won't question it.
Right, and then put their faces to do your dirty work. So about 40 to 50% of the Japanese police force was Korean, depending on what decade you were in. And their goal really was to turn these Korean people against each other. So 1930s roll around. This is kind of the build up to it. And forced rapid development continues. Massive industrialization projects hit throughout the 1930s, railroads, streets, transportation. This is all developed as a key part of industrial architecture. And by the end of 1938, over 28,000 kilometers of road were built under the supervision of Japanese colonial authorities. 5,400 kilometers of railway lines were laid by 1939, which would connect Korea to itself, right, but also with China and with Russia. And there was the South Manchurian Railway that was developed. And growth rates in the Korean economy actually ended up being slightly faster than Japan at this time. So by 1938, the annual growth rates in Korea were estimated to be at like 3.5%. Japan's were around 3.3%.
Oh.
Yeah. But, of course, these spoils still did not benefit the Korean people in the 1930s.
Well, so it's kind of all the same.
It's kind of all the same because they're viewing it as Japan. So in the 1930s, a scholar observed that Koreans were still poor merchants and that Korea's cities still did not have a commercial bustle. The cities of Korea, he said, were largely centers of administrative activity. Not a single city in Korea is busy and brisk like a trading center of the Western world, or Tokyo, or Shanghai. Seoul, the largest, has a population of less than 370,000, and even here, everything seems at a standstill and quiet. One observant scholar was impressed by the rapid development of Korea in the late 1930s, though. He said that it was an obvious, indeed astonishing success, even if he described the development as being, quote, oriented towards the need of the empire. So, people call this a Korean boom period from 1936 to 1938, but yes, of course, again, none of the benefits of this boom went to the Korean people. It all went to Japan. And Susie Kim writes of this period and says, rather than taking such changes as a sign of progress, it is worth asking what was driving such titanic shifts. The dynamic engine of capitalism itself made efficiency and productivity cornerstones of everyday life, making it necessary to compress time and space in order to maximize profit. Now, in her book, she actually goes on and has that beautiful section where she talks about the compression of time.
And she talks about communist time and modern time and all.
It's very, very fascinating. I do recommend, if you're a member of our Patreon, to go listen to that chapter from her book in our book club. It's not super relevant to our texts today, so we're not going to get into it too much. But I think we're thinking about what it means to modernize, what it means to create quote unquote progress for who? For capitalism.
I mean, there is, right, like, again, I won't call it modernization. Industrialization.
Yes.
And what Marx calls like the socialization of labor.
Yes.
That labor just becomes this like large ass fucking project that involves like huge sectors of the population.
Yeah, your entire life becomes the relation of
and like entire like the life of an entire city becomes like this like extremely interconnected sort of laboring force.
Right.
Is, if you are a Marxist, a kind of necessary component of the road to socialism.
Yes, it is.
Right,
it definitely is. Yeah, you have to pass. I mean, look, they call people who believe this stages, right? They're like, well, Marx didn't say explicitly you had to have a capitalist stage, but Marx laid out that a capitalist stage was probably necessary for the development it takes to have a sufficiently developed means of production to do socialism. And when people explicitly ask, well, like, I live in a Russian commune, like, do I really have to do capitalism to get there? Marx is like, no, you probably don't. But like, in general, generally speaking, most people will.
And that is, again, like kind of the point of all of those New York Tribune articles is like looking at current events of being like, actually it's kind of good for some place for like industrialization to happen on this massive global scale.
Right. And that is very interesting. So Marx was not like everything must happen exactly this way all the time. Like the whole point of Marxism is that it's not particularly dogmatic. But for most people, most places, they will find this is necessary.
Yeah.
And that's what we see to be true. Most people, most places, this is necessary, this kind of thing, to get them to a point where they're able to do communism. Now, what's interesting that we will see about North Korea is that all of this infrastructure that was developed by this horrific period of imperial violence against Korea by Japan, the Korean people didn't even get to really take hold of it and utilize it for their benefit and development when they eventually got independence from Japan, because the United States bombed it to smithereens.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, that's...
It's quite sad, you know? It's like whatever good, quote-unquote good, potentially could have come from this.
I wouldn't even say good. Whatever conditions could have existed because of the intense industrialization of the country.
Yeah,
right.
Definitely nothing good. They could have developed this on their own without the Japanese as well. And we'll see that in Korea they did. They developed it all on their own thanks to Juche ideology and being subjected to massive total blockades.
I learned recently that apparently like there are some like freaky internet right-wing people who are really into the Juche idea.
Oh, because they misinterpret him as being an ethno-state. This is what I'm talking about. People who do these weird readings of Korea and don't read it as anti-imperialist nationalism, but as like weird neo-Nazi shit or something. It's really freaky and weird. But yeah, so yeah, whatever utility could have come from the existing infrastructure built by Japan during this awful, awful period, the Korean people didn't even get to make use of it because the Americans destroyed it anyway. So whatever the case, bureaucracy continued to grow throughout the 1930s. By the last decade of this colonial period, 246,000 Japanese civil servants and professionals ruled over 21 million Koreans. About 46% of the colonizer population was working in government service. So in 1937, the French, meanwhile, ruled a Vietnamese population of 17 million with 2,900 administrative personnel, right? And about 11,000 regular French troops. The British, even smaller administrative populations and military populations in their colonies. So, again,
like the Japanese are sort of like, even as they are trying to sort of offload responsibility for the administration of Korea as a colony to like the Korean professional class,
they still have 100 times the representation of civil service that France does in Vietnam.
Hey guys, you guys keep like killing yourselves or
us. Yeah.
So like,
house is on fire. Yeah.
We kind of can't leave you guys alone.
Right. They literally have like 100 times the amount of representatives there in service. Civil service, service, quote unquote. So imperialism also at this time was taking root in the financial sector. The Korean Industrial Bank was the main source of capital for big Korean firms by the 1930s. And by the end of the colonial period, about half of its employees were actually Korean, not just Japanese. The Bank of Chosun played the role of a central bank and provisioned capital finance throughout the imperial realm into northeastern China. And in 20 branches laid out in Manchukuo, that's it. And it served as a fiscal agent for Japan's army and even had an office in New York to end up getting American loans for colonial expansion there. So it also trafficked in opium, silver, and textile smuggling on the side.
That rocks.
Yeah, very, very CIA coded. They participated in the Nishihara loan, which was designed to buy off Chinese opposition to Japan, that was imposing on Chinese sovereignty, which I guess got kind of infamous. And industrial banking jump-started major industrial projects that led to industrial commercial entrepreneurs becoming powerful, too. They also exported the textile industry to Korea through loans and buyers for Japanese textile machinery, which is pretty interesting. There's a lot of clothing that comes from this period, if you're into vintage clothes, that is made in Korea. And North Korea actually carried through this tradition. They have a very, very vibrant apparel manufacturing sector. And North Korea, even because of the blockade, they developed their own synthetic fibers from the materials that were only found in North Korea.
Oh, sorry.
Are specific to North Korea. They also would end up later on, obviously after the country was divided, doing apparel manufacturing for places like Sweden, making jeans and stuff.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, like, this is apparently a lot of Volvos wound up in North Korea at some point because of trade with Sweden.
Yes. I think that the story is that they stole them.
Oh.
They never paid for them. I think it's kind of cool.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Love a Volvo.
I think they deserve it.
Yeah.
I think the Korean people deserve to steal Volvos from Sweden, and I'm on record saying that. I think if they want to steal more from Sweden, I'd be okay with that.
The 240 is such a classic car. Like,
you love a Volvo.
Favorite car in the world.
Yeah.
Though I will say, take a close look at the Volvo symbol someday, because the Volvo has a reputation.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very conservative car.
Yeah.
Take a look.
Okay.
I'm just gonna. It's just like it's the dude symbol.
Oh. Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So. They were also working, obviously, with the United States and England throughout all of this. The Japanese allowed Americans to run Korean gold mines until 1939 because they were like, well, America's a better technology for this. The Chosun Oil Company set up a refinery in Wonsan using American Oil Company blueprints and consultations. So the United States was profiting off of this arrangement, which we knew we would. That's why we were like, we think Japan should be in control of you, right? So additional attempts during this time also to subvert the Korean identity took hold, even as they were ostensibly telling the Korean people that they were like training them for independence. We see that there was actually more social control going on. So Korean colonial subjects were prohibited from speaking the Korean language in schools starting in 1934. They were forced to worship at Japanese Shinto shrines in 1935. And the traditional Korean white hanbok was discouraged, and they were told to wear dark work clothes instead to reduce laundry loads.
I mean, this is, I will say, smart.
I mean, yeah, in like an evil way.
No. I'm just saying.
Even thinks we all should wear dark clothes. I mean, but what I will say that's cool is that if you look at even North Korean leaders today, they wear dark clothing in the spirit of this actually like industriousness. They're like, yes, we wear dark clothing because I'm a worker and dark clothes are associated with being a worker.
Oh, interesting.
So like Kim Jong-un wears dark clothing usually, and people
he doesn't want what happened to Obama to happen to him.
Tan suit.
He's never going to wear a tan suit.
So new heroes for the struggle in Korean sovereignty emerged during this time. So in 1931, Japan invades China. They annex Manchuria, and a guerrilla resistance emerges between both Chinese people and Korean people, when they're like, damn, fuck Japan, right? So there were over 200,000 guerrillas who were all loosely connected, including bandits, secret societies, fighting against the Japanese that were comprised of both Chinese and Korean fighters. And Korean resistance in Manchuria was very strong. A Chinese source found that Koreans constituted a higher percentage of resistors as a proportion of population than any other ethnic group, even including Han Chinese people.
Oh, sick.
So this group included a now infamous man, Kim Il-sung.
Oh.
So I think next week for our bonus episode on our Patreon is going to be a brief biography of Kim Il-sung because he's a very interesting character and obviously very important because he would become the first leader of North Korea. But he was a significant guerrilla leader by the mid-1930s, and the Japanese considered him one of the most effective and dangerous guerrilla fighters. So everybody kind of acknowledges that, you know, whether he was on your side or not, people respected him as a fighter and as a soldier. And they respected him not just for his fighting techniques, but also for his sense of ethics and morality. They actually, the Japanese, formed a special counterinsurgency unit just to track down Kim Il-sung. And they would staff it only with Koreans to try to prolong their divide and conquer tactics. And he basically became a legend, like a myth, like, oh, Kim Il-sung in Korea because of this, because the Korean people saw that he was such a thorn in the side of the Japanese officials. And the Chinese started to really respect Kim Il-sung. Even the Japanese officials who hated him spoke of him with respect because they were like, well, he's
like the scary guy.
Foe. Yeah, he's really, really good at what he does. So the North today claims that Kim Il-sung single-handedly defeated the Japanese.
That might be a slight overstatement.
That might be a little bit of an overstatement. But that's
he's their fucking George Washington.
He's their George Washington. Of course they're going to talk about him like this. Yeah. Yes. The South today claims that Kim Il-sung actually was the man. He was fucking legit. But there's no way that he could be the guy who was the leader of North Korea because they were taught to hate North Korea. So they claim that actually the real Kim Il-sung died and was replaced with an imposter. And that's who was in charge of North Korea.
We are in Dalai Lama territory.
We are in Melissa and Avril Lavigne territory. You don't know about this? You're looking at me confused. Oh, yeah. People claim Avril Lavigne died and was replaced by a clone named Melissa. And this is what South Korea, to this day, South Korea
cool.
believes this. They believe Kim Il-sung was not the real Kim Il-sung and is an imposter. There is no evidence of this whatsoever. This is not true. This is a conspiracy theory. This is what many people in South Korea believe. Because they can't fathom that the man they looked up to and admired, Kim Il-sung, who was a hero for them as well, became the leader of North Korea because they were taught North Korea bad. So, there's 2 Japanese Kwantung army colonels in 1951 who were documented speaking of Kim Il-sung. Now, these were men who tracked Kim Il-sung in Manchuria, who provided Americans with their experience, their judgments on like how to fight Korean guerrillas during the Korean War. Okay, these were not men who were sympathetic to Koreans. They were not sympathetic to Kim Il-sung. But they described Kim Il-sung as being the most famous Korean guerrilla leader in the late 1930s, and of him they said Kim Il-sung was particularly popular among the Koreans in Manchuria. It is said there were many Koreans who praised him as a Korean hero and gave him secretly both spiritual and material support. So even they were like, everybody loved this guy.
Yeah.
This guy was the man. So Kim Il-sung was, it's worth noting, never the kind of man who would become a puppet of the USSR or of China. Later on, when he would come to be the first leader of the North, this is not the kind of guy who could be subjugated to anybody. He forged his own path. He had a strong sense of ethics and morality, and he was a great fighter. And people really did love him. So he, along with other Korean guerrillas, would cooperate with Chinese leaders. They were not the kind of people, though, who, I don't know, like there's this idea that North Korea was just like a secret puppet country of the USSR. To believe that, you have to believe Kim Il-sung was not the man he was.
Yeah.
You have to deny reality about who this man was, what it meant to be Korean. Think of all the Korean resistance leading up to this. All the Koreans committing suicide rather than being colonized. Kim Il-sung considered the greatest fighter of all the Koreans. You would have to believe that this man would allow himself to be controlled by a foreign government power.
I mean, I just like, I don't know, that like it does give a kind of James Bond version of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Where as like, which is like, I have a lot to, I don't know, the Soviet Union at a certain point entered a flop era that lasted
the Khrushchev flop era.
Decades.
Yeah.
But so I don't like.
But yeah,
they're not
able to mastermind this. And they even at the time were like, oh shit, we'll see this. They're like, you guys got it handled here? Good. Because we literally just came out of World War II and we lost like millions and millions and millions of people. We got our own problems to deal with. We don't have time to mastermind a secret new little country over there.
Yeah.
Right?
Like,
it's just,
they're like, maybe at a certain point in the 60s and 70s, the Soviet Union is like, kind of getting their shit together enough to be like, we can send guns.
Yeah, they're like, call us if you need something. We'll see if we've got it. That's it.
But
this is not some mastermind thing. So, there's a part of this text that says they did not care about the relation of their command organ with the Soviet army or the Chinese Communist Army. They ran back and forth across the Soviet border to escape counterinsurgency units, but the Soviets provided little weaponry or material aid. So this was really a Korean resistance at its core. And to pretend that it is somehow the USSR or China orchestrating it is to do a great disservice to the Korean people and their spirit of resistance.
It's also just dumb. It's
dumb. It's a childlike view of the world. It's not grounded in reality. That's just really fucking disrespectful. So, anti-communist ideology at this time starts to get spread aggressively by Japan throughout Korea. Krishnan, the writer of the paper, which is available on JSTOR, and again, you can read things for free on JSTOR. You can read up to 100 articles.
They make it so annoying.
They do make it a little annoying.
You are not allowed to download the PDF.
And also, not every paper is available, but this one is.
Yeah.
So it is available on JSTOR. I will have a link to it. It's a great full read. But Christian says the Japanese colonial rule, especially after 1931, was characterized by a fusion of colonial and fascist orders and was hence fiercely anti-communist. So for anybody who doesn't know, fascism, Mussolini created it to be an anti-communist ideology. The Korean people had thus to undergo the traumatic experience of living under one of the most organized and strident anti-communist terrors in colonial history. So much so that the struggle against anti-communism and the struggle against colonial rule got inextricably interlinked. The Korean Anti-Communist Association ended up getting established. It had branches in every province, local offices, and police stations, and participation in anti-communist discussions that were kind of spiritual in nature became compulsory in workplaces and schools, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this really shows that the communists were the ones leading the resistance against the Japanese even into the 1930s. Korean communists were interrogated. They were forced to confess political sins. They were forced to, in writing, renounce their communist ways and join groups for people who had reformed their communist thoughts.
You know what this sounds like? Communists. And how the evil, pernicious Bond villain communists.
They would do just this.
Yes.
They would totally do just this, except it wasn't. It was anti-communism. So, and this was what was happening as we enter the period that would become World War II.
Mm-hmm.
So this is going to be the last section we talk about in this episode. And next week, we'll talk about the aftermath of World War II. So let's get into World War II. It starts in 1939, right? 1939 to 1945. Korea becomes the production hub for Japan during the war. Now, obviously, Japan enters the war on the side of the bad guys.
Uh-huh.
Because bad guys.
The Indiana Jones villains.
They're like, hey, Nazi Germany.
Mm-hmm.
We love it.
Hey, Mussolini.
Yeah, Mussolini.
I guess they probably don't care as much.
But they're like, we like this whole fascism thing you've got going on. We, too, would like to engage in this.
Mm-hmm.
We love evil. Let us join your axis of it.
We would like to do war crimes in China on a mass scale.
Yeah, we would like to do some of the most horrific things you have ever heard about in your life.
We're going to freak out even some of the Nazis
with how fucked up we are to people in China. Let us into your bad guy club. We, too, can be supervillains. So they join World War II on the side of the very, very bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, haha, yeah, we're here. We're showing up with the Nazis. Fuck you all. And because they're like, we got to win the war. Where do they go? They go to Korea. They're like, hi, Korea. Since you're us, but like not really. But since like you don't have an identity anymore and your identity is literally just like smaller, weaker, littler Japan that does stuff for us.
It's also, I keep thinking Japan's a very small island.
Yeah, but they're like spiritually smaller to them, is how they're.
No, I understand. But I'm like, right. This is a sort of a condition of the imperialism. Is like, well, we kind of do need a place to do all of our stuff.
Yes. So Japan goes to Korea, sorry, other way around, and is like, you now, brave other Japanese people, just like us, you now have the great honor of making all the stuff for our war. That's so cool. Aren't you so proud to be Japanese just like us? You're so Japanese just like us. Make stuff for our war now, other Japan.
And the Korean people totally buy it, which is why Korea is now, to this day, a part of Japan.
Yeah, no. The Korean people are like, literally, fuck you. We are not Japanese, and we don't want to do shit for your stupid fucking war. But they're forced. They have to. So the Japanese basically are using Koreans for labor, not just keeping them in Korea, but also sending them to Japan and to Manchuria to work. So in 1941, 1.5 million Korean people were in Japan, forced to do labor there for this war effort. 770,000 were in the labor force, 220,000 in construction work, 208,000 in manufacturing, 94,000 in mining, and the rest in agriculture. At least 500,000 more were additionally sent to Japan after that. And by the end of the war, Koreans made up fully a third of the industrial labor force in Japan. Wild. So 136,000 alone were working in mines in the harshest form of labor. So in Korea, mining had been kind of shunned, and Japanese mines used hardly any machine power. It was the worst kind of work you could do. Koreans were forced to work bare-chested, including women. It was just like, yeah, go in there. It's hot. You get in there. Forced to expose themselves. They were forming 60 to 70% of what they called the pit force in the mines, doing this work 12 hours a day from dawn to dusk. And, hundreds of thousands more Koreans were sent to Manchukuo to do the same kind of work. And colonial authorities started establishing quotas for the mobilization of workers, forcing Koreans to travel to places like Japan, like Taiwan, to work for the war effort against their will. And so they'd be forced to do this kind of labor. They'd also force girls to go be comfort women, comfort girls, forced into sexual slavery to help the war effort, quote unquote, as well. So somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000 Korean women were mobilized into sexual slavery in support of the troops, along with also Filipino women, Chinese women, and a handful of Westerner women. So this is obviously a very, very dark part of Korean, not Korean history, right? Of Japanese history, because they forced this to happen. But this is something that is a huge issue that Korean people talk about to this day. And there's this photo that circulated the internet of Kim Jong-un hearing the testimony from surviving Korean comfort women, and he's crying listening to their stories. And one of the most fucked up things that happened is Westerners reappropriated this image and assigned a false headline to it and said that he was crying because Korean birth rates were low and they didn't have enough workers for North Korea or something. And it's so fucked up if you know what the image actually comes from. It is literally from a testimony of him listening to people who survived the comfort women system talking about being forced into sexual slavery. But yeah, this is something that's become a huge part of Korean people reclaiming their history and talking about the horrors they experienced under Japanese imperialism. So we have the story of one woman, Pak Tong, who told her story later on in 1979. A lot of Korean women did not want to talk about this.
Yeah.
It was very private to them, and it was only when people started coming forward and talking about it that they realized the massive scale and scope of this. So she says she was taken along with 20 other girls, more or less, to Taiwan by Japanese forces. Remember, Japan was exercising colonial control over Taiwan. They were kept there for months before they were taken to Canton, where they were forcefully stripped for examination by Army medical officers. And she says this humiliated her, but also confused her because she did not understand sex. She was so young. She didn't understand nudity. She had no clue what was happening to her. It felt very, very violating. She didn't know what was happening. And then from there, she was immediately taken to what they called a comfort station, where she was expected to provide sexual services to the men on her second day there.
Jesus.
And she was uncomfortable being naked in front of a doctor. And then 2 days later, it's okay, go have sex with all these soldiers against you. Well, obviously not sex. We know that's
yeah, this is rape.
This is rape, yeah.
Okay.
So she resisted, obviously. She's like, I don't want to do that. She was beaten. She was starved. She was denied food. And eventually she was forced to give in. So she said usually daily she was forced to be assaulted by 15 men. Sometimes, though, over the weekends, it would be 50 all in a single day. Yes. All of them bought condoms and tickets for access to the women. And they were handed over nightly to the Japanese manager of the facility. The women, of course, received no money, and they were told they would be paid when Japan won the war. Obviously, that didn't happen. Japan did not win the war. And when the war ended, she, along with around 50 women, were assigned as nursing aides to the army hospital. So this was her story. And these Korean girls who were forced into the sexual slavery were selected by Koreans. The Japanese sent Koreans to go do the selections for what girls would be sent, so that it would appear to be a Korean operation, even though it was Japan handling it. So, this was common for sexual slavery practices, but also for other kinds of forced conscription, forced work. They were usually labor mobilization offices, typically in police stations, and they picked laborers from among poor people, disadvantaged people, marginalized people. And the people who were assigned this role of selecting who would go to these forced labor assignments became the most hated men in their communities because they were Korean. But everyone was just like, fuck
They were like,
you
guys are traitors.
Yes. So a Korean village elder and former county chief told an interviewer, he, as a village leader, had to bow to pictures of the Japanese emperor at school or any public meetings. He had to supply men for labor in Japan, the South Pacific, elsewhere in Korea to work in factories, mines, and similar projects. And these people later on would be marked as collaborators. They would be like persona non grata amongst the Korean community. The same way people who collaborated with the Germans, the Nazi Germans, were persona non grata in their communities as well. The Japanese were viewed... What do you mean?
I mean, sometimes, like, right, like much.
Oh, you're saying not everybody. Some people were like, haha, we didn't mind. Is that
well, yeah, no, I mean, like large parts of the Vichy government were allowed to just, like, slink back into the shadows and then, like, emerge and become quite powerful.
Yes, okay.
Like,
that's a fair assessment. I would say, though, that for a lot of, like, Jewish people, they, like, remembered who collaborated. Yes. Yeah, but you're right. Some areas, it was totally fine. There were whole regions that collaborated with Nazi Germany.
Yeah, and this is, right, like, why, like, the RAF kept bombing shit in, like, the 70s, where they were like, well, half of our fucking government is just former Nazis.
Right. And that's why Stalin did the forced deportations, which you can approve of or not approve of. But it was an attempt to resolve an issue where you had entire geographic areas that had collaborated with the Nazis, and they didn't know who had and who hadn't. So they didn't want to execute everybody in an area because... not everybody had, but they didn't want to leave them together because they didn't want them to form new Nazi governments again.
Which is arguably much of Western Europe.
Yes.
Just for, like...
Yes.
Right, like, into Italy and to, like, all large sectors of the economy, large sectors... I don't know what the solution, because I don't feel like, but
I feel the same way where I'm like, yeah, it's not ideal. It's collective punishment. The USSR's approach was to break people up. Like, you would break up people who were getting in trouble at school. You go over there, forcibly deporting everybody. When you look at this, you're like, this is collective punishment. This is not ideal. I don't think anybody would be like, that was a good thing to do. But when you ask people, what would you have done instead? I don't have a clue.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is what makes me feel like we're playing Risk. Yeah. Because I am like, we are just sitting in your office.
Yeah, we don't have to know. Well, thankfully, we don't have to game plan that. But that is a real thing. So for the same way many Jewish communities knew who had collaborated with the Nazis and these people were shunned, this is how many Koreans who were collaborated with the Japanese were shunned by their communities as well. So in late 1944, Japanese authorities forced 7,000 Koreans into labor to build a huge underground bunker near Mount Fuji, basically for the empire and high officials of government to take shelter. And it was supposed to be to prepare for the decisive battle of the homeland, or for the homeland.
So this is, you said empire, was it emperor?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Oh, imperial.
Oh, okay.
Just imperial in general. So this was completed just before Japan surrendered. And a bunch of Koreans died trying to make this. It was hasty. It was dangerous work. It was tunnels and caves. There was no precautions taken for their safety. At least 1,000 Koreans died during the construction period. That they don't know exactly how many. And a lot of people said that people who completed it and understood the layout of it was the emperor, the emperor's inner sanctum, they were later killed intentionally so they could not lead anybody to it.
Gotcha.
Yes. So it was very, very brutal. And while this is happening, further attempts were made to subjugate Korean identity under Japanese identity. Japan was attempting to convince the Korean people, we're all in this war together. We're the same people. And Cummings said at this time, Korean culture was simply squashed. They were coerced to adopt Japanese names in 1939 at the onset of the war. Of course, the conscription of the soldiers, laborers, military sex slaves, that started in 1940. This was also when Koreans were forced en masse to start to worship at Shinto shrines. Before it'd been like, well, if you want this special privilege to get this ID card, you could do this or whatever. Now they're just like, no, you got to do it. Shinto was a strictly Japanese religion, which also is worth noting. Shinto was imbued with Japanese nationalist ideology. So it wasn't just a religion. It was like a spiritual
presumably
about Japan.
Right, like this was like concurrent with this era, right? Like it's not like Shinto from time immemorial had a Japanese nationalist ideology. It's like we are going to mobilize our religion as
an indoctrination tool to convince you that you are
probably also like Japanese people, right? To get Japanese people on board for some shit that like
yes.
Yeah.
So the Korean capitalist class was also during this time, during the war, encouraged to grow because they would then turn on the other Korean people because they were making money off of the Japanese war effort. So by the 1940s, big landlords who were people owning more than 50 chongbo, it's a unit of measurement, it would be like 120 acres basically. In 1942, there were over 2,000 Koreans and 1,300 Japanese people that fit into that category of land ownership. And 184 Japanese people and 116 Koreans held more than 500 acres total. So, coming said, in this period, the Korean majority suffered badly at the precise time that a minority was doing well. This minority acquired the taint of collaboration and could never shuck it off. Korea from 1937 to 1940 was much like Vichy France. Do you say Vicky or Vichy?
It's Vichy.
Vichy. Okay. I always said Vicky in my head.
Yeah, there's just some chick in your past name, Vicky.
Yeah.
That you're
Vicky.
like, fuck that shit.
Fuck Vicky. Much like Vichy France in the early 1940s. Bitter experiences and memories continue to divide people, even within the same family. It was too painful to confront directly, and so it amounts now to buried history. Nonetheless, it continues to play upon the national identity. So obviously, the final chapter of the war is going to be the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So in 1945, Japan would surrender and World War II would come to an end, forcing them to release their control over their colonies, including Taiwan and Korea. But this wouldn't happen until after the United States dropped the world's first and only deployed nuclear weapons on Japanese civilians. So often not considered in this is the fact that these mobilization efforts for labor meant that thousands of Koreans were present in Japan when the United States dropped nuclear weapons on them. At least 10,000 Korean people were killed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, most of them forced laborers who were sent there due to colonization. One man survived, and we have his story. He was Korean, and his name is Yu Chun-sung. He was drafted in 1944 to labor in a naval engineering operation. He and another Korean worker named Shin Tae-ryong arrived at the Hiroshima station at 8:05 a.m. on August 6, 1945. He said he looked at his watch just as a hot, blinding flash enveloped him. Then he started running desperately towards Mount Futuba behind the station. He kept running. He was stumbling over rails. He was stumbling over iron fences at the station. And he reached the foot of Mount Futuba. And there he says he spent the night in a half-ruined farmhouse. And on the next day, he was carried via a rescue truck to a Navy hospital nearby. He had gauze dipped in oil on his burned face. He had wounds that ended up getting taken over by maggots that hatched at his burns. And around the year 1950, which was 6 years later, he started out of nowhere to vomit blood and have bloody stool. A few years later, his wife bore a child named Dong-soo, and the lower half of Dong-soo's body never fully developed. Another child had the same small lower body, but with a head twice as large as a normal baby's, and he died after 3 months. Yu ended up becoming a grocer, and in 1968, though, he again fell ill. By 1972, when he was 55 years old, he could not even move. He was described as being thin as a ghost with a wax-white face. He suffered random attacks at intervals of about 1 minute, and when this happened, his limbs and entire body writhed. He gnashed his teeth to be able to endure the pain. And he ended up dying after a few months of these types of fits and episodes. As Dong-soo reached puberty, the one whose lower half of his body never developed, he tried to commit suicide 3 times. And after his father passed away, he refused to eat and died within a year from hunger.
Jesus.
So this is a story of one of the 10,000 Koreans who were not killed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but were forced to live and endure the effects of nuclear bombing that occurred. While this was happening, in Korea, a new form of power among colonized people was taking hold. So Susie Kim explains this, and this is kind of going to be what guides us into next week's episode. So this is just to wrap this one up. The increasing political repression in the 1930s had driven Korean anti-colonial struggles underground, and it made coordination difficult, but elements of resistance in the northern regions of the peninsula bordering Manchuria had never been entirely stamped out, and that's because of the location's remoteness. They couldn't get to them. Also, the North had been isolated from the centralized bureaucracy in Seoul, and the majority of the landed elites were based in southern Korea as well, just because of the topography. It's very hard to own valuable land in the North because it was over 80% extremely hostile, rugged, jagged mountain terrain. And while the South was over 70% hills and mountains, it was not nearly as extreme as that territory. Furthermore, people in the northern regions had a history of intermingling, as you said, with other nationalities, Mongolians, the Jurchen tribes along the northern border. So the North was much less attached to the traditional Confucian hierarchies based on status and wealth that had been used to the advantage of the Japanese colonial forces there in the rest of Korea. Mobile slash-and-burn farmers in the areas had been radicalized through Red Peasants Unions, and the region became the geographical basis for growing radical left-wing movements amongst peasants and workers. Anti-colonial resentment created fertile growth, she says, for both professional revolutionaries and newly politicized peasants, who almost immediately filled the power vacuum that would be left in the wake of Japan's surrender in World War II on August 15, 1945. Peasant unions throughout Korea served as the prelude to the People's Committees, as those who had been active in the unions were often elected to head the PCs, which would later become the governing force of North Korea. As Japanese troops retreated to their barracks and colonial officials nervously awaited the occupation forces, villagers banded together to preserve peace and organize local self-governing committees throughout the country. By the end of 1945, the entire peninsula was covered with people's committees at all levels, down to the villages. They were spontaneously organized to carry out revolutionary justice. They set up people's courts to punish those who had collaborated with the Japanese as national traitors, took over local government offices to distribute land and preserve local security. They showed enormous capacity for organization. Most of them had sections for propaganda, peacekeeping, security, food, finances, welfare relief, consumer affairs, labor relations, tenancy rates, among others. An American official in Korea at the time observed that all colonial government agencies became powerless, and that people's committees preserved the peace and collected necessary taxes, prevented looting, bloodshed, and rioting. People's committees were supplemented by peasant unions, worker unions, peacekeeping groups, and organizations of students, youth, and women. And this period where the Japanese colonial power over Korea dissolves and the people's committees take root, and this new era seems to be on the horizon for self-governance of Korea is the period we're going to talk about next week. Sick. Okay, so that's it. That is part 1 of our series on Korea.
And I swear to God, at the end of this,
we will never talk about Korea.
In fact, I think I hope, because this has been your autistic special interest for a few years now. Am I wrong?
I don't know.
Am I wrong?
I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe. I don't know.
Okay, we'll take the autism out of it. We'll take the neurodivergence out of it. And we will just say that you have been monomaniacally hammering this particular name.
Not just this, Cuba as well.
Cuba was more recent in terms of like that becoming monomaniacal.
I guess you're right.
Yeah. You have been hammering this nail for literally years.
Well, I think it's because the internet is so resistant to it. I'm like, you guys are so dumb. This is the most obvious group of people on the planet you should support. It is crazy to not support North Korea.
Okay, sure.
So it's because I'm constantly up against this opposition.
Yeah, but this is like, I keep telling you to get the fuck off the internet.
I know.
This has been my, like, I deleted all the social media apps.
And that's been going well for you.
Well...
And there we have it.
Yeah, but those are externalities that cannot be controlled. Yeah, in any case. All right. I'm saying stop arguing with people on the internet, and then your life might be better.
We'll see. Anyway, join us for next week when we get into part 2, the period from 1945 to 1950. And go check out our Patreon, patreon.com/pickmeupimscared. It's $3 a month. You get access to bonus content. And next week, our bonus content, we'll be talking about a little bit of the biography of Kim Il-sung.
And I think we have some interviews.
We got some interviews coming up as well with some interesting people. We're going to pop on over there. We're doing it, baby. We're doing it. $3 a month. Okay.
All right, let's do it.